Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Maddie Beer Temple. Commercials and advertisements for colleges and universities are a common sight. They are a regular presence on social media and part of any collegiate athletic broadcast. But how do universities engage in branding, and what does their branding say about their identity? On this episode of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron talks to Lawrence Lockman, Vice President for Strategic Communications at Penn State, and Lee Ahern, Associate Professor of Advertising and Public Relations.
Thank you so much for joining me. Interesting topic, branding. So what does branding in higher education mean?
I guess I heard a very good definition once from a firm called Stamats, which specializes in it. It said it's about promises made and kept. Students are willing to pay tuition for the education they receive. Donors are willing to invest in the university. Employers hire students that are graduated. Faculty and staff commit their careers to the university because of their perception of what the brand delivers.
So I like this whole idea of promises made and kept, but my thought is that, here you are branding a cereal or an automobile, and there's a tendency to have it go, okay, this is advertising, I don't know whether I should trust this. So if I combine the words branding and university or higher education, is there some negativity to this, or is it really something just like any other thing that we're advertising for?
Well, branding more generally, I think, can be positive and negative, and you mentioned advertising specifically, and I think certainly any time brand messages are in that advertising format, you're going to have people that push back a little bit and consider it just advertising. They're going to discount what they're hearing. Doesn't mean that the message necessarily is not going to have the desired impact. That's one of the hallmarks of effective branding, is to be able to tell people what you want them to think about your brand without them counter-arguing what it is you're trying to convince them of. And so I think the way we teach branding in the College of Communications tries to unpack some of the ways that you can do that, and what separates a good brand from a poor brand, and what are the aspects of branding that can really help you if you're trying to create equity, which is often included along with branding is creating brand equity. So how do you do that?
So there's a lot, it seems to me, to unpack on there. One is you didn't necessarily use the word advertising with branding. So this is really, you're incorporating messaging in a very big way about an institution.
Yeah, people think of advertising when they think of branding, and it's really fun to look at advertising as kind of
a component of it.
A component, and the most visible one, right?
Yeah.
So you can really look at a well-done ad, and I was just talking to Lawrence about some of the recent Penn State spots that I think have been very good. And it encapsulates it all for you, so you can really look at what the messaging is and what the strategy is. But there's other elements in the marketing mix that are probably even more important for building a brand: innovation, excellence, quality, market share, market capitalization. All of those things are going to impact how people perceive your brand. The advertising is just one that you have complete control over, and is the one that should really distill your message exactly the way you want it.
I think there's a point to be made too, that the claims you make in communications, advertising, public relations, word of mouth, have to be real. There ought to be proof points attached to the communication, and brands get themselves in trouble when there's too much hyperbole, and the claims that they make about a company or a product or a service aren't consistent with how people experience them. And so you need to take very seriously what you really can say, and that part of it.
So that was one of the other parts there that I was sort of thinking in terms of unpacking it, because this is what you want someone to know about you, but you can't make it up.
Right.
So it's not a good brand strategy to say Penn State is the best in this and we're the best in this, and gee, we're the better than anyone in this. That's not a good strategy.
Not a good strategy. It doesn't mean that we talk with confidence about what a wonderful university we have and all of the great measures of that and the stories that help to demonstrate it. But too much hyperbole can get you in trouble.
Just nobody believes it.
And there's a role in this context that Lee and I were talking for voice and messenger and tone. And so a lot of universities have these spots where they talk about really how great they are in the voice of the university. But really, alumni and faculty and students sometimes are the best voices for what the university does, and much more believable to the public. And so when they tell their stories, whether it's through advertising or public relations or other means, people will listen differently. So it's not just what you say, it's what people hear.
So how important then does, and it sounds like it's very important, that the mission of the institution, the culture of the institution, all of these, now the voice of a student, that's more believable, but if this is going to be real, you need to really analyze who we are, what we are as a higher education institution. Do we do a good job at this?
I think we do a very good job. As a matter of fact,
Does higher education do a good job at it?
I think higher education, as Lawrence and I were talking about, is a little late to the game. So some of them want to play by the rules of branding that were really perfected by consumer packaged goods firms and automakers that you mentioned. That might not be the best model for something as complex and has so many different dimensions, facets. As a university, so many different audiences. You've got the alumni, you've got the students, you've got the faculty, and they all have different kind of meanings for what the university represents and how they connect to it emotionally. So it's a real challenge. But branding done well is really about creating a symbol, and a symbol that is visual, that represents something emotional or something intangible. So this is what all the best brands try to do, and if you do it well, you can get past some of that pushback or that reactance, that the psychological term that people have. As soon as you're trying to convince them of something, as soon as you have an argument that seems to have different elements, a premise and a conclusion, it's just natural to try and unpack that and say, well, wait a minute, is that true? Or you're trying to convince me of that.
Right.
Whereas if you just present a story of a student who's here, who gets to explore and discover about themselves and people around them, there's no real argument there. It just is. And
so then the viewer is the one that's discovering the message.
Discovering the message, and therefore not counter-arguing and not arguing with it, and also connecting on an emotional level, which is what most brands will try and do. And that also comes back to this idea of brand equity. In other words, can a good brand and can the development of a good brand make your product, university, whatever it is, more valuable than it was? It's worth more than the sum of its parts. And how do I create that brand awareness? And you mentioned arguing, we're number one in that, number two in that. And those are all great points.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned the market share or innovation, when you walk down the street in New York and see an Apple store, that's part of your brand awareness of the brand. And
it is, yeah.
You see a big store and it's very impressive and it's just super forward-looking and innovative, and it creates an awareness and a meaning for you. Whereas if Apple had an ad that said, we're the best and most innovative and we're number one in this and that and the other thing, it would come off as wrong. It wouldn't come off as resonating and come off as preachy.
You're just trying to pitch,
Right. So there's
pitch me something.
different ways that you can convey your number one, or you have a big market share, or your tops in research funding, or your tops in faculty production. And there's ways those things will get communicated in the context of a 60-second spot or a 30-second spot. You tell the story a different way.
You know, it's interesting because you said we're late to the game, and I would have said we're terrible at it. Not Penn State, but I would say. So when I came into this, I have it all in my head, based on the advertisement. I did it again at football games or basketball games, which for every university in the country seems to be the obligatory shot of students walking through the gate of the campus. There has to be a gate, an opening, you're coming in or something like that. Has to be a diverse. You need to communicate that you're a research university, so there must be someone in a lab coat or holding a beaker. And this is so far from a modern university. I mean, Lawrence, I don't know how you feel about it, but I would have said universities are terrible in this space.
I wouldn't give universities a high mark in general. Too much hyperbole and a sea of same.
Yep,
the
a
spots
sea of the
as
same.
you describe, and you
Yep.
can almost take the name of the university
And
swap
substitute it.
on the spot, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah.
And part of the idea of branding in the communications realm is to differentiate, actually, and identify proprietary messages and opportunities that, depending on your business goal, are appealing to your stakeholder, your customer. We have a unique educational model between World Campus Online and 24 campuses, the ability to do research as an undergraduate. So there are ways to begin to model those things that are proprietary to Penn State. We have a strong community, and we train our students very well for employers. And we can point to surveys and examples that demonstrate that. And so if you use branding in the combination of advertising and public relations, messages, slogans, you can begin to communicate those messages in differentiated ways that can actually help to drive applications and acceptances by the students we'd like to recruit.
So I hear an important point in here too, and that is, there are over 5,000 universities and colleges in this country. We need to have some differentiation. So a huge portion of this brand development is literally to somehow not have a Penn State be the same and the same, again, or however it is that you phrased it, that differentiation. So let's just take a couple minutes and do it right. You're sitting in University X, you're going to walk in there, you're going to develop a brand strategy. What do you do?
Well, I think you have to figure out who the decision makers are.
Yeah.
And that plays a huge role, because what you described to me of these kind of plug and play different versions of a university ad says to me that at some point an agency who probably wants to be more creative comes up against a decision maker who's naturally
dull.
Well, risk averse.
Risk adverse, okay.
And said, well,
good way
and
to
there's another psychology there that Lawrence and I also were talking about a little bit, and that is that the nature of universities and the way they developed at the leadership levels might feel like branding is tawdry. This is maybe something I don't even feel like we
Goes
should
back to
be
the
doing.
beginning discussion
It's
about.
too much like what they do in consumer packaged goods or automobiles. So you get the pushback, and if I'm going to do anything at all, I'm going to be super strafe, and I'm going to go with the cookie cutter interchangeable model, which doesn't differentiate you at all.
I just couldn't do that.
Which is, we got the right decision makers here that obviously went with creative that was a lot more interesting, and I think pays off when you do that. But the whole point of modern branding is to take an undifferentiated product and make it different.
Yeah. So
That's
then
how they
what's
evolve.
next? You have leadership and convince them that the differentiation is important, and that's step one. What's step two?
Step two is identifying a set of goals or objectives
That you're trying to achieve.
that you're trying to achieve.
Enrollment,
Increased funding, research dollars supported from grant organizations and donors supporting new campaigns, and campaigns that may be focused, for example, on energy security or food security, as we have here at Penn State. So when you begin to look at what the enterprise's overall needs are and goals, then you look at how can I align the communications function in a campaign to reach the right audiences, to move forward communications that make them predisposed to be aware of our priorities and their role in making them successful for the institution and for them, that they feel ownership as well by the investment or the support. And so you need to set those objectives. An objective could be, we need more advocates and supporters in Pennsylvania who appreciate the value of how we enrich the economic development in their communities, to talk to legislators, join our advocacy or
So you
program
have the objective.
to help us bring in more state funding.
You have the objective, and then you got to have the stories that fulfill it and the messenger.
Right.
Is this sort of the sequence that you?
And at the end of well, you have to manage expectations when it comes to the measurable on something like a 60-second ad, because oftentimes
It's a different story.
yeah, people will watch it and maybe have a great connection and like it, and you'll ask them whether they saw the ad and they won't remember, right? Even though on a deeper level they do. They did have a connection. So oftentimes it's difficult to measure in a concrete way the impacts of any one message. But what I always teach in terms of advertising, it might be hard to quantify the effectiveness, but we know it works because everybody's doing it. And people pay millions and billions for advertising for years over time because they know it's working. Unfortunately, the location of brand equity and the location of brands is someplace that's very hard to get to because it's in people's brains.
Yeah.
The brand is not that logo, the brand is not that color combination or the typeface. And why brands are valuable is because all the individuals out there who have some kind of an association or meaning that goes along with a brand or with Penn State, that's in minds.
This is that association.
And that's the value.
So let's take a look at a Penn State example here, and we'll watch it.
Our process that we've invented improves survival rate of plants. It's designed to reduce the environmental impact of fertilizers. Better roots make for better plants. I was able to take advantage of Invent Penn State and explore my business idea without all the risk associated. I went from being a plant science student working in a lab to now being an entrepreneur. I feel like I'm making a difference.
So let's dissect that. What do you see in terms of identity? What was the messaging? How is it contributing to exactly what we've said of differentiation and communicating to people what Penn State's all about? What do the two of you see?
Well, you're probably pretty invested in this. It's the first time I've seen it.
So you go first,
Okay.
and then I'll say what I.
Well, first of all, it's in the voice of a student.
Nice.
So it's about an experience. It's about an experience of empowerment.
Yeah.
Of them to be able to take what they've learned and what they started to discover as interesting and to carry it forward in a meaningful way, of almost a journey of self-discovery. And I think that the choice of imagery to go along with that, obviously the nurturing and the growing and the watering is, we're not just watering and growing plants, we're watering and growing people so that they can, grow into their fullest potential. And so I think the underlying emotional message here is empowerment.
And the tagline? Or your intent? I happen to like it a lot. So.
Yeah, I think one of the wonderful things about Penn State is the strength of community.
Yeah.
And the size of the community of so many people doing those kinds of things who are actually making the world a better place. And so part of that message is to demonstrate the ways in which we all benefit from what's happening at Penn State through students like Hunter.
So I know we don't have too much time left, but I want to make sure I ask, so there's a message, 30 seconds. How does it end up as a campaign? How does it end up as an organized effort at branding, Penn State?
Well, the way we usually teach branding is the brand theme, which would be the "We Are," and that's something that would go over several years or maybe even decades. There are some brand themes that have been out there for a long time. And then the individual campaigns are organized around some concept, and this one would be student empowerment, I would imagine. You could have a couple of different spots that all speak to how that happens here. You could have another set of spots that are more explicitly about community. You could have a set of spots that are more explicitly about maybe excitement and fun and self-discovery in that realm. And those could each be individual campaigns.
And Lawrence, your thought here in our final seconds?
So we have about 15 or so
Of these
types of stories, and we do research to see how they affect alumni and faculty and staff and other supporters of the university. And we see that they feel more connected to Penn State, more motivated to give or volunteer or hire a graduate as business people. And that's what I want them to feel, and that, of course, then supports our efforts to engage them more in the life of the university.
You know, I'm going to end on a yes/no. Do we know which is the favorite of alumni of the 15?
This is one of the favorites. It's not, I don't know that we have one favorite.
But we have some that
Yes.
attract more. Okay.
And the science of it is we can actually adjust how we move it out based on which ones are responding the best in the marketplace.
I have a lot more questions. It's such a fun topic, but thank you so much for joining me. Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, President Barron.
My pleasure.
Branding, interesting topic, a lot of different aspects to it.
Yeah.
So something that you guys talked about was how branding isn't necessarily what you say, but what people hear.
Yeah.
So I think with Penn State, a lot of people tend to think of football games and the "We Are" chant and a lot of school pride kind of associations.
True.
But how would you describe Penn State's brand for somebody who might not know that much about the university?
You know, I think there are a lot of parts of it. And, you know, I would say land grant, except who knows what that means. But in fact, the message there is in service to society. And that's part of that one community impacting many, is this is our role. And it's not just commencement and graduating students. It's about all that useful research. It's about the outreach we do. It's about the service that we do. So in my mind, that is a key element of what makes Penn State special. We actually live this mission of serving society. There are a lot of sub-elements to that, but in my mind, that when I'm thinking about where the university should go, that's what I'm thinking about. How do we serve society?
And the whole service outreach component of Penn State extends beyond University Park with World Campus.
It is phenomenal, World Campus, but we have Innovation Hub in Penn State. Within 30 miles, we have a facility within 30 miles of 96% of the population of Pennsylvania. Same thing for our campuses. We have ag extension agents that are helping agriculture and farmer in every single county. If you look at our new program that's related to substance abuse, huge problem in Pennsylvania and the nation, we have programs and people in every county in the state of Pennsylvania. So if you look at our TV station and the reach of that, and the radio and the reach of that, we literally live this state.
And with so many different entities, how does Penn State work to keep a consistent brand?
So, you know, in my mind, there are the simple pieces of it, so that if you go anywhere within Penn State and look at it, you see the same colors, the same messaging, the same symbols. So it looks like there's a, I don't think that's subliminal, but it's the same thing. You're in Penn State, you're in Penn State. And after all, we only have a degree from Penn State. We don't have degrees from other places. So all of these are part of it, so that you give a flavor So for example, when we admit a student and they're at a campus, we now, what they see is the campus they're going to, not something that's generic, but it still has that same flavor of the messaging and branding of Penn State. So the team actually works to be very consistent in that space.
And talking a little bit about how higher education branding is kind of similar across platforms among other colleges, Penn State actually has a lot of branding classes for students to start thinking about their own professional identities. So why is it important, do you think, for students in college to start thinking about their own brand?
Well, I think we actually heard from our experts. So if you have 5,300 universities and colleges, how do you distinguish yourself while also communicating the truth? Communicating in a way where people hear it. This has to be the same thing for students. With thousands and thousands of college graduates, how did you distinguish yourself while it also being the truth, real, and your messaging enables somebody else to hear it? So I would say that very same conscious thought process through branding at a university makes sense to me for a student.
Absolutely, and I know a lot of these are kind of targeted toward freshmen to start thinking about early as soon as they step on campus. So really great opportunity, and thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. And from viewers like you. Thank you.